This is one of the oldest cemeteries in the Icelandic capital city. There are some very unique features of this cemetery, as well as an odd ghost story surrounding it. This is the story of the whole Lagathur cemetery. A quick note before I continue, there are a lot of Icelandic names in this video that I won't be able to pronounce correctly. I will try my best, but if anyone from Iceland is watching this, my apologies for butchering your language. Back in the day, the Reykjavik area was just a series of farmlands. It had a church, a small churchyard, probably from the very early days of Christianity in Iceland, which was adopted around 1000 AD. But as Reykjavik developed into a village and then a town in the 18th and 19th centuries, a new burial ground was required. The new graveyard outside of the little town of the time was finished and ready for consecration in the summer of 1838. Although the new graveyard was available, burials continued for some time in the old churchyard on some Icelandic name I can't pronounce. The last burial took place in 1883 in this churchyard where 25 generations of Reykjavik residents were laid to rest. The new burial ground was not consecrated immediately, due to a superstition that the first person interred there would not rest in peace, but be the, quote, custodian of the graveyard. His body would remain undecayed in its grave, and its goal of the soul was to watch over the graveyard and receive those who were brought there for burial. No one would wish such a fate on their loved ones. So there ended up being quite a delay in the first person being buried there due to this superstition. The first burial in this cemetery was that of Guthrun Oddsdóttir, the first wife of the president of the High Court, with a name I cannot pronounce. She was buried on the 23rd of November, 1838, when the graveyard was also consecrated. On her grave stands the largest iron cross in the graveyard, which is also the oldest memorial. The original graveyard was about 80 square meters, and it was extended in stages in 1869, 1903 through 1905, and 1918 through 1920, 1923 through 1926, and 1927 through 1930. Today, the graveyard is 3.5 hectares in area, and over 30,000 people are buried here. By the 1930s, space was very limited in the graveyard, and in 1932, a new cemetery was consecrated at Fossvogur. New burial plots were not allocated in this cemetery after that, but burials have continued in existing plots. A few burials still take place each year, as does the interment of ashes. In the year 2000, the National Museum of Iceland compiled a register of all the memorials in the graveyard, which were more than 100 years old. They ultimately determined there are about 15,000 of these memorials in this cemetery. The memorials in this graveyard reflect the changing trends of the times in their symbolism and form. Many renowned Icelanders of the 19th and 20th centuries were laid to rest here, and so a stroll through this cemetery is like walking through history. You can also see the trends being evident in the actual headstones themselves based on the style, the amount of religious symbolism on there. It was very interesting to look at. Some notable graves here are the father of the Icelandic independence is buried here. Can't pronounce his name. Iceland's most famous painter is buried here, and the first woman member of parliament is also buried here. There are also victims of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, as well as a monument to French sailors lost at sea. Although the cemetery is fully booked, the only really way to get buried here is if your family had bought a spot prior to 1930. You can still bury your dead there if you have sort of a family plot and the land has been purchased before 1930. After spending quite a bit of time exploring Iceland, a lot of the countryside, I was struck by one thing. There are hardly any trees in the entire country. It is very rare to see trees. You don't have proper forests like you do in places like Germany or like where I live in Colorado. But this cemetery has a myriad of not only tree species, but there's trees everywhere. It is a small forest within the capital city, and it is probably the most tree-rich section of land that I saw my entire time in Iceland. Enjoy the rest of the walkthrough, and I will catch you guys in the next video.
Are you gonna take a picture?